I've been working off the iPad for 3 years now, and I wanted to compile a list of tips for working off such device. Most of these tips will work for any model of iPad, but a couple are specific to the new iPad Pros. I'll link to all the apps, videos, and accessories I mentioned in the video in the description below. So let's start things off by taking a look at the home screen. You can long press on an app icon that takes advantage of the Files API to see what the most recent files you've used are. The dock can hold up to 13 apps, or if you have the 12.9-inch model, 15 apps. It's not just apps you can put in the dock, but you can also add folders as well. If you'd like to move multiple apps at once, just long press on the icon till they start shaking, move the first icon, then start tapping on the others. Now you can drag those apps to different pages. If you're like me, you can have a whole screen with no apps on it, just a much cleaner look, though of course you don't have to. The apps on the right side of the dock are the most recently used apps that aren't in the dock permanently. This is handy for multitasking. There are several ways to trigger multitasking. If you have an app open, swipe up from the bottom and long press on an icon. Then start a drag and then drop the app. You can grab the bar between the two apps to resize the multitasking window. You can also trigger Spotlight by hitting the Command key and the spacebar at the same time. Type in what app you're looking for, start a drag, then drop the app to do multitasking. You can also have a third app up for multitasking as well. Start a drag and then drop the app right in between the two existing apps. This is called slide over. You can move this to either the left or the right side of the screen. To dismiss it, all you have to do is move it to the right side and then swipe it right. This will hide it. You can bring it back by swiping on the right side to the left. When apps are in split view, they're in pairs. You can see the pairs by doing a long swipe up from the bottom. Here you can see all the apps that are running. You can force quit an app or a pair by swiping up on them. You can also swipe along the bottom up part of the iPad to jump between the recently used apps. Swiping down from the top right corner will get you Control Center. Here you can control things like Wi-Fi, volume, brightness, HomeKit, and more. Long pressing on the music icon will give you the option to AirPlay to compatible speakers. If you go into Settings, Control Center, Customize Controls, you can add and remove controls in here. One of my favorites is the ability to do screen recording, which is how I do the screen recording for a lot of my videos. On the home screen, if you swipe all the way over to the right side, you'll get the Today screen. Here you can place widgets to display useful information or a way to launch quick actions from apps. If you swipe down to the bottom, you can hit the Edit button and add or remove more widgets. Some widgets I find useful are ones like my Task Manager and my calendar so I can see what's going on in my day, and the Shortcuts widget so I can quickly launch shortcuts. If you're using AirPods, an Apple Pencil, or a smart keyboard, you can see the battery life in the battery widget. In some video players, you may see a special symbol. If you hit that, the video will move to picture-in-picture mode. You can pinch and zoom to resize and swipe the video to move it around. YouTube unfortunately doesn't support this feature, but there are third-party apps to help with that. I use an app called CornerTube, though there are others out there. When watching the YouTube video, just hit the share button, then more, then select CornerTube. After that, just start the video and hit the picture-in-picture button. Spotlight can do a lot more than just search for apps. If you have a keyboard, hit the Command key plus the spacebar and you can launch it from anywhere. Spotlight can bring up content in specific apps, files, web search results, and more. A handy trick is doing measurement conversions. For example, I can convert pounds to kilograms through Spotlight. I also use this to run Siri Shortcuts from here as well, but more on that later. When dealing with any kind of file, web page, photo, etc., you may see this icon. This is the share sheet. From here, you could share out whatever you're looking at to a different app like Messages or Mail, or you can pass a file through to another third-party app for more actions to take place. If you swipe over to the far right, there is a More button. Here is where you can turn on and off third-party options for the share sheet. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it, and I'll show more as we go along. Settings has a lot of hidden gems, so let's take a look at a few. In the iCloud section, you can go into backups, and here we can manually trigger backups. Backups are supposed to happen automatically when the device is asleep and charging, but on the safe side, I like to come in here once a week and just trigger this. Screen time was a feature that was added in iOS 12. Here you can see the time usage of your apps. This can be important information if you're wanting to cut back on games or social media. You can also go in and limit the amount of times you use an app or a category for each day. If there's a certain app in a category you need access to no matter what, you can whitelist them. This can act as a very basic time tracker if that's something you're interested in. In the keyboard section, you can turn off and on third-party keyboards. I like to have a keyboard called GIF keyboard around for some fun. In this area, you can also make text replacement shortcuts. One I use a lot is the double @ symbol to quickly place my email address in a text field. Others I find useful are my phone number, address, and text I type often. Under display and brightness, you can go in and turn off True Tone and Night Shift if your iPad supports that. Though these are great features to have, if your work requires some sort of color reproduction like photo or video editing, this may throw your work off. Third-party apps have the ability to disable this feature when the app opens, but not all of them that should do this do it. For me, I just leave them off all the time on my iPad just to be safe. In the Siri area, you can make quick one-off shortcuts for actions that donated to the system from third-party apps. Just tap on one and pick a phrase you want to say that would trigger this action. Now, when talking to Siri, you can say that phrase and it'll trigger it. Also, these actions will show up in the Shortcuts app so you can add them to longer scripts if you like. You can have two Safari windows side by side by doing the drag and drop multitasking gesture with a tab. To go back to a full screen, just close the tab. You can add a web page icon to your home screen through the share sheet by hitting the Add to Home Screen option. In settings for Safari, you can enable a few interesting features like fave icons. This will enable site icons on tabs for Safari. Content blockers are an important way to navigate the web now, unfortunately. I use OneBlocker X for mine. To enable this, you just go into settings for Safari, after you've downloaded the app, of course. Files was introduced in iOS 11, and it was not the traditional file browser many expected it to be, including myself. Files is more of a repository of different cloud services. The first being iCloud. iCloud directory is broken up into different apps, giving you the ability to see what file was made in what app. Though it's not just for apps, you can make folders in the root directory. Just pull down and hit the new folder button, then name it whatever you like. From there, you can save all sorts of different files, closer to what a traditional file browser is. If you want to add more services to files, just hit the edit button on the top left side. You'll have to install the apps like Dropbox and Google Drive first and sign into them. Once you've done that, just select which ones you want to show up. If you pull down on the directory side, there are a few options here. First, you can change how things are sorted. I often switch between name and date. Next, on the far right side, you can change how items are displayed. This will toggle between list and thumbnail view. You can add a folder to the favorites section by dragging and dropping them in the favorites area. This is a great way to navigate to commonly used folders that are kind of buried and aren't at the root directory. Just a warning, I've had some issues where my favorites have disappeared and I've had to re-add those folders to that section. Next up is tagging. I did a whole video on how I do tagging and I'll link to that video below because it can kind of get in depth. The short of it is when you have a file open, tap on the share sheet and hit the new tag option. From here, you can add a file to a tag that already exists or create a whole new one. Unfortunately, the amount of colors you can pick from is pretty limited. Once you've tagged a file, you can easily call it up just by tapping on the tag. Then everything in the tag will appear. Files is a really handy app to have, and I'm hoping it gets some major overhauls in the next version of iOS. Apple Notes is a great basic note-taking app with a lot of hidden features. First off, you can organize all your notes into different folders. After that, the Notes app supports all sorts of different kind of media, including rich text. When typing, select the text format button to see all the options. You can jump between headings and monospace font, bold and underline, and even make bullet points from here. You can also embed tables as well. Just tap on the buttons on the top or the side to add rows or columns. This isn't going to be epic Excel level tables, but for basic stuff, it's pretty good. If we hit the checkmark button next to the icon, we can build a task list. So if you're not big into having a task manager, but a project or a note requires you to make a list, that option is there. Under the plus button, you can embed photos and even scan documents. Photos are embedded inline and they fit right next to your text. You can even drag and drop them to move them around. The scanner works great if you have physical documents you would like to turn digital to store within your note. Dragging and dropping a URL will make a card image of the URL. This makes saving a lot of URLs a bit nicer than having just a standard string of text. Overall, the Notes app is a great place to get started for text. As far as task managers goes, the built-in Reminders app is pretty basic, but this is great if all you want to do is write down stuff you need to get done. You can make multiple lists if you'd like to break up your task into projects or where the task needs to be completed at. When creating a task, you can have it remind you at a specific time or when you even get to a location. The best part about Reminders is how it hooks into Siri, so you can just tell it to remind you to do something at a specific time. This plays into the next app quite a bit. Siri Shortcuts is the app that brings iOS together. This is the automation platform for iOS. Here we're able to script things to run together, like creating a document or showing us our tasks, calendar appointments, and what the weather's like for today. There's a lot you can learn and do with Siri Shortcuts. I've done a few videos already on how it works, and I'll be sure to link the whole playlist below. I use shortcuts daily for tasks that wouldn't necessarily be impossible to do on my iPad, but Shortcuts makes them a lot easier. If you want to work off an iPad, I highly recommend getting to know Shortcuts. First-party apps on the iPad don't cover everything. Luckily, the third-party app options are one of the things that make iOS great. When I was using a Mac, I loved having a Clipboard Manager, an application that kept a list of everything I had copied. Unfortunately, with iOS restrictions, we can't get a traditional Clipboard Manager like how the Mac has one. But I use an app called Copy, and it's pretty straightforward. Copy the text you wish to save, then open the app. It'll automatically add it to the list. If you wish to add an older item to your clipboard, just tap on it and then hit the copy button. Then go paste it wherever it needs to go. I use this a lot for when I'm building shortcuts that deal with text or URLs. There's a bunch more features in here, but this is pretty much the basics to a Clipboard Manager on iOS. I'll do a follow-up video and go more in depth on it later. If you've ever done any kind of programming, you've dealt with a lot of text files. I wish iOS had a better way of dealing with these files, especially considering how simple they are, but luckily there are third-party options that make this feel like a native solution. Pretext is an app that can not just edit plain text files, but it can also edit markdown files as well. I use this a lot for my day job as I have a ton of text files saved in various cloud services. Pretext uses the Files API to navigate, select, and create files, giving it a very native iOS feel. This is a great app to always have around because you'll never know when you need it. No matter how far you run away from a traditional PC, you'll probably have to deal with some sort of Microsoft Office document sooner rather than later. Luckily, the Office apps are pretty decent on iOS. You can even save out to the Files app if need be. The one downside is you have to have an Office 365 subscription in order to fully take advantage of editing and saving. But what that does mean is if you just need to view documents you're sent, you can do that for free. I don't rely on these apps to make documents myself, but I do get sent stuff often enough that it makes it nice to have them around. If you do need them for your everyday work, rest assured they work just like the desktop version. iOS has a built-in preview option for viewing files like PDFs, and it works really well. But if you need to do anything with those PDFs other than read them, you'll need something with a bit more power. I personally like PDF Expert by Readle. PDF Expert allows you to edit PDF documents by adding text, signing with a stylus, and more. If you pay for the Pro version, it'll even OCR a document and make it editable. It hooks into cloud services like Dropbox and Google Drive, so you don't have to keep importing and exporting files. PDF Expert is a great way of handling PDFs on the iPad. An uncommonly known feature about iOS is you can install custom fonts. I use an app called AnyFont to do this. Essentially, it just creates a profile for you to install the font. The downside is the app that you want to use the custom font in has to support the native font picker. I'll include my video on how to install fonts below, but if you do any sort of graphical work on the iPad, this is a must-have. I talked earlier about how the Files app is good for cloud storage, but not so great for saving stuff locally. Luckily, there's an app called Local Storage that fixes this issue. Local Storage just makes a folder in the On My iPad section and will allow you to save any file type in it. The benefit is it won't take up any space in your cloud service of choice, and you don't have to wait for it to download when you need the file. I use this for all of my video projects. I've talked a lot about shelf apps and how they are good options for a desktop replacement. My shelf app of choice is Yoink. This is great because it syncs files between multiple devices. I use this for files I don't need to save forever, but just need them on whatever project I'm working on at the time. It's really easy to just drag and drop files into Yoink and be able to get them out whenever I need them. Until the home screen on the iPad has the ability to store files, I'll use this as my pseudo desktop replacement. Dealing with zip files is still a big deal, and iOS natively doesn't make it easy. What you can do to get around this is use an app called Zipped. With Zip, you can just drag and drop the files in, it'll create a zip file, and then you can either share them with the share sheet or save them to the Files app. It'll also uncompress zip files by doing the same thing. Just drag and drop them, and it'll ask what you want to do with them. You could also make a shortcut to deal with zip files, but I find Zip to be just a much easier solution. Sometimes you may tap on a link to something, and a web page may open instead of the proper app. This happens with YouTube a lot. You can use an app called Opener to fix this. When on the web page, select Opener from the share sheet. It'll take the URL and then open it in the proper application. This comes in handy for YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and more. I could go on forever about apps, but I am trying to keep this video at a reasonable length. I'm going to include a link to my favorite apps in the description below. This list will include a multi-track video editor, photo editor, podcast editor, task managers, and more. All of these apps are great if you work off the iPad, but they are a bit more specific than what this video calls for. The iPad has some great hardware accessories, so let's take a look at them. All iPads work with Bluetooth keyboards, but if you have a USB adapter to plug into the iPad, you can get a wired keyboard to work with it as well. This is how I use a mechanical keyboard with my iPad. If you hold down the command key, you can see all the keyboard shortcuts for the active app you have open. This also works on the home screen, so you can see system-wide keyboard shortcuts as well. Apps like Ferrite and Things 3 do a really good job of taking advantage of keyboard shortcuts on the iPad. If you use a third-party keyboard, you can hit the eject key to bring up third-party keyboards like the emoji keyboard. On the Smart Connector keyboard, it's the globe key. With the new iPad Pros gaining USB-C, it opens them up to a wider range of USB-C hubs. My favorite is one from Kingston. It has 2 USB-A ports, 2 USB-C ports, one for charging and one for data, HDMI, and an SD card reader. The Apple Pencil is one of my favorite accessories, and I can't even draw to save my life. What's great about it is the ability to navigate the UI. I use this for a lot of editing videos and podcasts. It just makes it easier on my hands since I suffer from RSI. When the iPad is asleep, if you tap the screen, it'll open a note, and you can start writing straight away. This is great for taking a fast note so you can come back to it later. You can also change how this works in the Settings app under Notes. In Settings for the new Apple Pencil, you can change what the gesture does globally. Third-party apps have the ability to override this, like Ferrite, where the global setting just wouldn't be appropriate. This is the basics to start working off the iPad. I hope you pick something up from these videos. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really does help out. Thank you for watching and have a great day.